Item 5 is to receive a report from the Office of the County Executive relating to the jail facility transformation process. Deputy County Executive Consuelo Hernandez.
Consuelo Hernandez, Deputy County Executive. I'm joined this morning by my colleagues from the Sheriff's Office and Custody Health, Assistant Sheriff Duran and Dr. Luna. If you recall, in October 2024, the board approved county administration's recommendation for the jail facility transformation process. That process includes the 4 components that you see before you. This framework has allowed the county to balance the reality of our requirements and obligation to provide and operate a jail with the realities of our budgetary constraints, the goals of improving our jail facilities, and other efforts in the county around alternatives to incarceration. Today's presentation, rather than focusing on each element, will primarily focus on the recommendations that as staff, in partnership with our consultant, CGL, and taking all the input that we have received from very select members of the community to focus on what that investment plan looks like. First are the major operational priorities. So balancing the operational challenges with our existing facilities, the outstanding consent decree compliance, and the priority from staff and in caring for the inmate population, there were 4 identified priorities that would help shape the recommendations, and they're not organized in any particular order. The enhancement of our behavioral and medical services, improvements to our intake, resizing and reimagining the way that we house folks, all our existing bed capacity in our system. While we have the number needed to meet the projected population needs, the functionality of those housing units does not allow us to provide care in moderate correctional practices, a separation and function for women. So all of those together in addition to all the behavioral and medical needs are the major operational factors that were included to prioritize the recommendations. We also conducted a jail population refresh. In October of 2024, the board received a report around the jail population projections. One of the things that we found is that it's important to constantly be looking at those trends to ensure that we are not recommending overbuilding facilities when we don't need them. In our current rated capacity, we have over 4,800 beds in our adult jail system. About 3,800 of them are actually used and operational. By 2035, the county needs to have a little over 3,400 beds in our adult jail facility in order to accommodate our peaking factor of need. And so think about that 3,400 number. So as we look at these recommendations, that is the number that we are working around, not the current 4,800 that is in our system capacity. We also, when I mentioned the peaking factors, if we looked at our current population trends, the number is closer to about 3,000, but you have to factor in at a bit of a bump above the average daily population number. What are the conditions of our buildings? What are buildings that we can keep? What is a reasonable rehabilitation of an existing facility without disrupting operations? What is the reality of our budget and how much we can invest at once? Again, because we are required to have and operate a jail, and we are required to make sure that we maintain that in a manner that is good for the inmate and good for staff. How we've approached the recommendation in looking at the current financial environment, plus all of the investment that the Board of Supervisors has made in alternative efforts to incarceration, expanding behavioral health, is a long-term plan with a short-term prioritization of 3 phases of work that will allow us to directly address those 5 operational needs. This conversation is particularly difficult when we're thinking about the order of operations. So it is not a linear conversation. We are going to start by talking first about Main Jail North and the vacant parcel next to it, and then we will talk a little bit about Elmwood and wrap up with the cost estimates that we currently have. So for Main Jail North, what our team, in partnership with our consultant at CGL, came up with is a real need to shift the mission of Main Jail North. So currently, Main Jail North serves as our long-term housing facility. So if you think about best practices in correctional, folks that are in long-term housing with us at Main Jail lack the resources to connect to program. They lack the open space. They have these, because of the way that the building is structured, it doesn't allow for a lot of, touching the grass, as the young folks say these days. And then we also have this high-level system-wide medical and behavioral health care. So all of the needs across the adult system, jail system related to medical and behavioral, they're all housed at Main Jail North. So what we are proposing through this is to shift the mission of Main Jail North to a short-term and transitional facility that can really focus on that initial assessment and orientation, have a lower level of classification, and really have the medical and behavioral services that are solely focused on the folks that are staying at Main Jail and not for the system-wide. We are also recommending that we build a smaller structure next to Main Jail North, a 2-story facility, about 56,000 square feet. And I want to, again, impress upon you, there's no design here. The purpose of this is very technical, to identify the square footage that is needed based on the gaps in our system. Here, what we anticipate is having a refined intake process that would parallel workflow updates that Custody Health and the Sheriff's Office are working on. We've made some temporary fixes in Main Jail North, and if you have not looked at our new intake area, they might seem like they provide more privacy and more direct response to the consent decrees. We have seen other models that are less evasive, but still provide that privacy and security that people need when they're vulnerable coming in the booking area. So this is our recommendation here. It would have a second floor. We're also looking at this model and idea around what does short-term housing. We have folks that stay with us for half a day or stay with us for less than 10 days. Do those folks truly need to be transported to Elmwood, or can we hold them while we work on expediting their exit of our custody? Can we house them here and save money on transporting them? So that is something that we are working through, but the recommendation is to provide and build this structure. Then, of course, the question remains, what happens to Main Jail North? On the left, we show the current Main Jail North by floor, who's housed there, and what services are provided. We also have 1,113 beds that are activated. As part of the future years, and as I mentioned, it's not a linear conversation, so sometime after the recommendation at Elmwood, we will have to visit how to pivot some of the functions at Main Jail North. So you'll see here, we've called out the renovation of 3 floors and a reduction in the number of active beds that are used at Main Jail. This is still a work in progress. The way that we have framed the recommendations allows us to have these conversations subsequently before you make a secondary investment. And you'll see that later in the presentation. We also wanted to show you what we studied but are not recommending. The first is to build something across the street. The county owns a 3.1 acre site known as the Ritchie site. Building something on that site would create some complications from an operational perspective, meaning we would have to build some type of access point from across the street to Main Jail North, whether that be a tunnel or a bridge, which is not feasible. We also looked at the construction of a new jail, eight floors, similar to what we have now, 400,000 square feet. That would require the county to invest a significant amount of money in one facility. It does not give you the opportunity to explore best practices, and it means you would not have enough resources to invest in Elmwood, which is by far the property that needs the most attention. Those two were explored, not recommended. I'll pivot to Elmwood. We always start with the question of if we had the ability and the property to start over, what would that look like? So our consultant asked the county to look through our real estate portfolio to identify another property, or could we go out and buy another property, because it is much easier to design when you have a blank slate. That was not recommended. The amount of money that it would require to buy a property would be too expensive, and we don't have another parcel that would fit that criteria. And so our recommendation is to upgrade the existing Elmwood through a series of investments that I'll go through next. We also worked with the staff to think through, maybe we can't start from scratch, but if we, given the property that we have and the buildings, operationally and functionally, what would be the most optimal way of laying out? And I can share with you that we had variations of this. I'm very grateful to the sheriff staff and custody health staff who raised the flag and said, absolutely not. If you put the medical and mental health services where the current admin services are shown on this, it would not actually address the challenge that we have now, which is a 62-acre parcel. People getting to services from one end of the campus to the other is not functionally best for us. We ideally would like to centralize operations and have decentralized services in the different housing units. We shared this with you in March, but CGL has made a series of recommendations around the buildings that we should replace, renovate, or demolish. Everything in red you can see is what we are proposing to demolish. The blue was deemed functional enough and has enough life cycle from a building perspective to renovate, and the green is what we would keep without any renovation. So this first investment recommendation is a $1 billion investment that includes a pre-phase and 3 phases. The first phase is to construct a new warehouse. If I go back one slide, you'll see that we are recommending the demolition of the support services building. What's housed in there is the warehouse, the kitchen, and laundry. The warehouse is the hardest thing to replace. We saw in food, from a food perspective, during COVID, we were able to find alternative options. For laundry, we're working with the probation department to find an alternative solution on the laundry. But the warehouse at Elmwood serves a key operational function for the sheriff's office. This is the location where all supplies are housed for both facilities. And so not starting with that step would create a lot of challenges. We also looked at the possibility of leasing out a warehouse, building a warehouse somewhere else, and just the proximity, it makes the most sense to build that warehouse. And we've offered the sheriff's office 2 options that we are still refining. One outside the current fencing, security fencing around Elmwood. The second is inside. So we'll keep refining those. In either option, we still have the ability to move into the next phase, which is the demolition. So phase 1 includes demolition of the minimum camp. I again want to thank the Sheriff's Office for being very creative with this. This allows us to actually create space for new construction. It also immediately results in the reduction of 1,130 beds. So again, remember that number, that 3,400 number I mentioned earlier. We were very mindful of, as these phases happen, there's a minimum number of beds that we need to keep operationally to ensure that we are not creating other unintended consequences from an operational perspective. Working closely with the Sheriff's Office and Custody Health, this reduction would not impact their operations significantly. There's always an impact, but this 1,130 allows us to create room for the construction of 3 new, either in one building or 3 separate buildings, a new mental health facility, which is, remember, that was one of the 5 primary objectives in going into this effort, a new medical facility, which we do not have at Elmwood today, and the construction of 672 new male housing beds that would allow us to move the high population from Main Jail North, and for phase 3, the demolition of M2 and M3. So you have to kind of look at these 2 things together. One reduces the male bed population by 540. The other adds 672 new beds. But those beds are the types of beds, when we get into the design phase, that would allow us to actually practice the best practices in housing. Right now, if you look at the M2 and M3, they are more kind of congregate. They don't actually allow for the care of folks. There's no program space within the housing units. And so this is, in fact, more of a replacement project than it is creating something, the full replacement of 3,400 beds across the system. So there's an add and a delete. And that makes up the kind of first bucket of investments that county administration is recommending. This chart here shows you what I've articulated orally, which is our current system capacity, that 4,800 number I mentioned, against the proposed system capacity based on the projected jail population of 3,400. And you'll see here in this table, this is the pre-phase and the 3 phases that we are recommending the board consider for investment. It shows you a reduction of male beds, and it shows you an addition of 100 mental health beds for women. So I do want to recognize that after this first phase, we would have more women's beds than we need. But there's demolition phases that happen in the following phases. But what this allows you to do is consider your jail population again at this juncture before making any additional recommendations for investment. The board did ask for a long-term plan, and that is why you see county administration presenting this supplemental investment of $2.5 billion in future phases that are mapped out. These costs are based on 5 years from now. What it would cost. If you look at it from today's dollars, it doesn't give you a true sense of what that cost is. At this juncture, county administration is recommending not investing in this $2.5 billion, but the board asked for a full plan. So if at the end of the day you wanted to see holistically what the adult system looks like, this is where you would land. And I want to flag that it does not include a future replacement of Main Jail North. We probably have an additional 15 or 20 years left in that building. But because of the uncertainty of the jail population, we did not factor in that replacement. It is something we will absolutely have to deal with, but at this juncture. So again, just to make sure that I'm clear, county administration's recommendation is to focus on the 3 phases that will allow the board to directly address the 5 operational priorities that were identified that would address the consent decree, that would give the board the opportunity to truly make a significant operational change in how people are served in custody without having to invest the full program. It allows you to have that pivot. This is a schedule. Supervisor Lee, through prior board referrals, you have asked us for a schedule. This assumes some action from the board in August. This can shift extend further. In looking at what has been done in the past during the design phase, that has created a lot of lengthier processes. We have some ideas of how to integrate community input in the design and the application of best practices without substantially delaying the design phase of a project. Typically, you see a design phase permitting take around 2 years. If you're very efficient in your process. We have some ideas about how to integrate the community input. If you recall, Supervisor Ellenberg, in our community engagement plan, we are concluding this phase with the creation of an advisory group that would include members of the public, county staff, that would be looking at very defined design elements as part of the next phase. A few of us went on a number of peer engagement facility tours. This was, to some extent, an opportunity for us to learn from our colleagues what not to do. A lot of them did build during the pandemic and have actually seen similar trends to us, their jail population coming down. And now they have some facilities that are underutilized, which to some extent has allowed them to utilize the new facilities and vacate older ones. Or in the kind of worst case scenario, our colleagues in Arizona built 512 short-term beds without the adequate space for medical, mental health, and are now having to reinvest in that facility to make it more functional. We also did look at operational priorities when we were there. Supervisor Lee, you had asked us to look at specifically what a reentry service model might look like inside the jail versus outside. And I think we do still have more work to do on that front in how we pair our restorative services unit, which is inside, with our reentry services, which is outside. So there's space within this option as we get into the design to really look at what that looks like in a way that serves the most people. We went to Las Colinas in San Diego, beautiful campus. The way that it's designed, you think that you're in a college campus, and what we learned, unfortunately, is not everybody gets to enjoy the benefit of the open campus. I think we found that about 80 women that are housed there are the ones that get to benefit from the spaces. And so a lesson learned for us is, as we design, we should be designing with the operations team together. Because if we create these beautiful spaces that nobody can use and can't benefit from the restorative environment, then it is a improper investment if it's not actually going to support the folks that we house. We are refining. We still have a few other engagements that we have a meeting with the Community Advisory Board for the Reentry Center on Thursday. We will also be walking them through, hopefully, thank you, Javier, again, for coordinating this, a deeper dive on the recommendations. We are finalizing this before we go to the board on the 25th. And I will now turn it over to Chief Operating Officer Greta Hansen to share a few thoughts.